businesses create an online presence with digital marketing and web development, and then enhancing their online presence with things you probably have heard of when it comes to SEM and SEO and social media and all of that kind of fun stuff. But today we're actually going to be talking about Google Analytics 4.0. And this is actually the first time we're talking about this topic and really diving into some of the changes that Google is doing. And so this one's going to be a little bit interesting in that what we're going to be talking about is really the change that has happened on Google Analytics. So the previous version was called Google Analytics Universal, which I'll get into. And then now we've kind of moved into a Google Analytics 4.0. We're still getting stats, we're still tracking people, but how we're doing that is different. What we're seeing is different, and it's almost kind of flip-flopped on how Google Analytics is kind of approaching analytics, stats, metrics, and tracking users. So that's where we're going to kind of focus here on today. As it was also said, if you guys have any questions, please put them into the chat and we'll get to those at the end. As well as this presentation is being recorded so that you will get a copy of this at the end. So with all that said, let's dive into understanding Google Analytics 4.0. Okay, so some of the things we're going to be chatting about today is, okay, Ben, what is Google Analytics 4.0? I might have heard about this. You might be just tuning in because maybe you just heard about it because of the event, but really what is Google Analytics 4.0? And we're going to be talking about that. And probably one of the biggest questions is, how is it different than most likely the analytics that I'm using right now, which is Universal Google Analytics? Then we're going to get into a little bit more of what's new, navigating analytics, our general kind of strategy, and all those things that kind of go along with the changes, but also just generally having Google Analytics as well. Okay, so the first thing to kind of know about that we want to spend a little bit of time here today is understanding what is Google Analytics 4.0. So there's a couple things. So again, since we're going to be focusing on Google Analytics 4.0, knowing that we're going to be more focusing today on the changes, not necessarily like the strategy. The reason I mentioned that is if you've attended some of our previous workshops or you have basic Google Analytics knowledge, if you've been using Google Analytics for years and stuff like that, that's what's going to kind of be needed to really kind of understand some of the changes. And you can always find, we've got our previous recorded workshops on Google Analytics 1.0 and 2.0. And now we're looking here at 4.0. So really to understand is what we have right now is technically there are two different versions that you can have out there when it comes to Google Analytics. You can have the classic version, which is called Google Analytics Universal, or the new version of 4.0. They both are tracking systems that, again, is going to be able to track users' usage, behavior, demographics, all of these other types of things, conversions, all of that kind of fun stuff. But really, here's kind of the philosophical difference, is that Google Analytics came out with 4.0 because they really wanted to take a holistic approach and kind of the end-to-end journey. And what that means is they want to be able to track when someone gets onto your site, not only where are they coming from and what are they doing, but where are they maybe even going with other kind of devices, and just being able to really kind of get them to the end and really tracking how valuable is this person. If you really know, like Universal Analytics is a little bit more kind of quantity over quality. Of course, there's a conversion stack there. There's conversion reports that we can get within Universal, but at the end of the day, it's very just numbers in here. Google Analytics 4.0's goal is to really add a value and a qualitative kind of metric and qualitative state so that you can start to track your users on hopefully a higher value type of mark. So they are very conversion and return on investment heavy focused. Instead of just looking at the analytics, and I'll get into how this kind of works, is now we're going to add in some AI, some artificial intelligence to start to kind of tell us, okay, but what does that mean a little bit more? What are some things that we can actually glean from this instead of just looking at numbers and charts? And one big thing to kind of understand is you're going to see this new term cohort a lot within Google Analytics 4.0. And really a cohort is going to be really just a group of users that has kind of a common characteristic. So it could be an event that they do, a conversion, the same acquisition date. So really what we're doing is, we're taking all these people that have, that maybe entered the site on the same day, that came in from a certain event. So, again, maybe they clicked from somewhere, all the same place. Maybe they came in from Google Ads. Maybe they came in from the same state. And so it's really just understanding that Google Analytics 4.0 is really, again, you're going to see the word cohort a lot. And all it means is just a certain demographic and a collection of those people that share that demographic, so that you can kind of be able to run reports a little bit more granularly on them right out of the box. So this is where it starts to get into a little bit of the difference between classic universal analytics and then 4.0. So one of the things is understanding how, again, universal used to kind of track, and that's kind of called cookies. So, Google would, and still does, and I'll get into this in just a second here, is you can still be using universal, and they're essentially doing a cookie. So really what happens is a cookie goes onto someone's browser, kind of, again, they tag it, and then they're able to kind of track their web activity and all of that kind of stuff. Now what's starting to happen is the actual act of tracking a user is changing. So within Google Analytics 4.0 is that Google is actually stopping with kind of cookies and instead is tracking sessions. And so really, we're not so concerned about the person, we're more concerned of what they're doing. Now, what this does is, it's still a little, since Analytics 4.0 is still new, there's still a little bit of what this means kind of for marketers. I will be honest, with this shift though within Google, it can make sometimes reporting a little frustrating, because we sometimes can't get at other data that we might be more familiar with cookies. And some of that data is more about the actual user, more about their behavior before they kind of entered us, and then following them actually when they leave our site. The reason that Google is actually doing this, though, is due to privacy policies and reasons. As I'm sure you guys have all kind of experienced with not only pop-ups, but things seeing in the news and whatnot, there's a lot of data privacy concerns out there. And so Google's trying to change how they track people to be able to make it better for marketers, especially in places like even like the EU, where we have GDPR and different kind of regulations. Now that, again, some GDPR isn't related to here in the United States, but there is, some lasting kind of effects and some ripple effects. And of course, we've all seen with, again, Google and Facebook and Apple, all of these data privacy types of things, and realizing even though we can track them, sometimes these companies don't want to necessarily give us all that data and be able to do that. So here is kind of how it's kind of split up, is that there's this, universal analytics was session-based tracking, and now we have Google Analytics 4.0 event-based tracking. So of course the question is, what is that? Again, what's the difference between session-based and event-based? And this is a crucial piece to the difference between universal and 4.0. So a session is going to be a group of users, of user interactions within your website that take place within a given time. So we're going to be able to say, okay, within a month, we want to be able to see, again, the different page views, the events, e-commerce transactions, all of that kind of stuff that kind of happens. And so, but it's really like, I walked into a room and, again, everything I do within there is, again, is part of the session. Well, now we're kind of flip-flopping that. So now we're going to track events. So instead of looking at the analytics from a view of, we're looking at what they did while they were in the room. And again, I'm just using this room as a kind of an analogy, but when they went onto your website, what were all the things that they did on your website? That's session-based. Event-based is going to be where, so essentially event-based is going to be collecting and sending pieces of information that are more specifically kind of the action of the user that they took to kind of get there and what they did within there. So again, it gets really kind of complicated, but it's really more of privacy. So instead of focusing on someone coming into your website and kind of bouncing around, we're now just going to focus more or less what they actually did on the site. So instead of the person, we're now looking at more of the event or what they did. And this ultimately is leading us to what Google's looking for, which is a higher ROI. Now, of course, we want to know about the people that got there, but at the end of the day, we want to know if they're doing what we want them to do. Are they buying something? Are they filling out contact forms? Are they requesting demos? That's what's going to lead us as business owners and as us as website owners. That's going to lead the value to us and what essentially is going to bring us, again, money. And so you'll see, actually, I'll show you some examples here. You're going to see, different examples on Google Analytics 4.0 where we have columns of just a dollar amount. You used to be able to get that in Universal, but you had to go into 2-3 different places to get that. Now it's going to be front and center because Google's saying, okay, great. You were tracking, again, the person kind of before. Now we want to track what they're doing and actually is this conversion based. Another big thing that 4.0 is bringing to the table, and this may or may not affect you depending on if you have an app or not, but there is a lot more integration into the actual app. So like apps on your phone, you're going to be able to now track the kind of the app, sessions, events, and activity that's going on there. And one of the other biggest things that's happening with Google Analytics 4.0 is it's AI powered. And so, like I said, we're moving a little bit way, and you'll kind of see this. If you've experienced Google Analytics 4.0, you're used to seeing a ton of charts, a ton of numbers, a ton of graphs. That's actually going to start to be scaled back a little bit. And what we're going to see now is more artificially intelligence powered predictions and insights, essentially telling us, okay, so you see A, B, and C here. What does that mean and what can you glean from it? What can we maybe change on a business side? What can we change on a website side? What can you maybe even change from a reporting side here to actually get those kind of insights? Also, it's going to make it easier to track different types of things like clicks and people scrolling on your site and viewing videos on your site. It's called codeless event tracking. So before, if you recall in Universal, you actually had to set every single one of these up. You could still track these. You could still track if someone, again, watched a, video or stayed on your page for a certain amount of time or clicked a certain link that left your site. Here now, it's going to be codeless event tracking. So what's kind of nice is Google's automatically using artificial intelligence and using their tracking parameters and capabilities. They're now going to be able to, once you integrate this into the site, is now they're going to be able, you don't have to set up each one of those and set up coding. And then last but not least is probably one of the biggest things and one of the biggest prompters of why Google Analytics started tinkering around and trying to come out with 4.0 is cross-device usage. So when we're right now watching this maybe on a computer and then we jump over to our phone and then we jump over to our tablet and then we maybe engage with another device, it's being able to kind of track that person over multiple devices. So really at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a more sophisticated type of tracking metrics and analytics. Now, here's one of those things though, too, is you can have both on your site. And I highly recommend that you do both because I do feel that 4.0 will take you some time to kind of get used to because like I said, it's almost flipping the way that you looked at analytics over the past 20 years on, again, you're kind of flipping it around. So the way that Google is approaching 4.0 is almost reverse of what we're kind of used to here. So what's nice though, is they do allow you to have both. Now, again, I can't predict, again, what's going to happen to Universal in the future, if they're going to get rid of it. But really, you can also look at 4.0 as a supplemental tracking platform or tracking reports, again, to your normal ones as well. Because like I said, it is going to take a little bit of time for you to kind of get used to there. So one of the things is this might look very similar, but this also is going to look a little bit different. And remember when I talked about that where some of the reports and some of the granularness is right off the bat, again, we're kind of scaling that back. Well, you can see that here just within, again, what kind of reports are predetermined and what we have here. So just real quick, there are really kind of three main sections to Google Analytics 4.0. The bottom one is the admin section, that's staying the same. But in the upper left-hand corner here, this is kind of our report snapshots. There's really like two categories now of reports. We have lifestyle, life cycle, and then we have user. So we have life cycle and we have user, and those are going to be the different reports. We're going to get into those here as we go along, but that's obviously way different than when we had it broken out on universal of audience, acquisition, behavior, conversion. So again, we're kind of breaking them down just a little bit. Again, looking at life cycle, looking at that end-to-end journey of how, again, when people come to the site, it's really how are we getting them to that conversion? It's all conversion based. And then we also have some reports about the user a little bit. And then another really kind of cool new feature here, and along with just more of a classic one, is in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see number 3. That's going to be your date range. That's, of course, is the same, comparing data, doing all that kind of fun stuff. But and you can kind of see it grayed out there. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see like the little magic or the wand kind of symbol, and that is going to be the artificial intelligent insights. This is probably going to be one of those that you want to spend some time on and getting used to, because this is probably one of the coolest things about 4.0 is that we have these artificial intelligence insights, from Google to really start to understand these reports a little bit further. So instead of trying to learn all of these different reports and stuff like that, Google's now essentially kind of, attaching a little buddy for you and a little bit more direction for that to kind of help you. And to give you some examples here, so this is kind of, if you were to take a report on the right-hand side, you actually not only just get general kind of basic performance types of insights, now you can actually break them down. And some of these should look more familiar to universal ones: user acquisition, demographics, traffic analysis, technology, e-commerce. So to give you an example of some questions that you might be able to get, from asking analytics. And so that's what's kind of nice is you can actually ask them some predetermined questions and get some responses back. So you could say, on what days do I get the most users? You could look at how many users did I have this year? So, again, for demographics, what countries do my users come from? The trend of monthly users last year. So really what Google's trying to do is, instead of you having to try to go find all these reports, they're trying to make it more conversational. And we can kind of do that by starting with insights. And just as just as another kind of indicator here, or just as a recap, is any report or any time that you're on Google Analytics 4.0, again, in the upper right-hand corner, you want to look for the little kind of graph with the little magic kind of or star or sparkle symbols. And that's going to give you those, especially starting out with Analytics 4.0. These are going to be very critical for you. So you can start to understand, again, how 4.0 is conformed and what Google Analytics is looking for, but also how you can actually ask Google Analytics and get actual in-depth questions answered that most likely you need to report to either yourself, higher ups, your team, etc. So this is probably, honestly, my favorite section of Google Analytics 4.0 is this AI Insights, because it really makes it more conversational and breaks it down better. But as we start to go, so again, you should have some knowledge about universal analytics and understanding what acquisition is, organic, direct. And if you don't, I encourage you to check out our previous workshops, or you can ask me some questions. But I want to kind of break down some of so these are the reports that are predetermined now. So again, remember, they're split into 2 different categories. We have life cycle and we have users. So one of the life cycle reports is the acquisition report. And so really what this is showing you is it's going to be broken down by user. So for instance, new users. So right away when we do acquisition, it's going to show you, okay, when new users come to your site, these are the things that I'm going to be able to tell you. We can also look by session. So when someone is on your site, this is what people are doing when they kind of go on there. What's kind of nice is on the bottom left, you can kind of see this little kind of search, and it says first user source and media. What this is doing is now you can essentially go into one report like a new user report, and then they're going to create mini kind of micro reports. So again, this takes a little bit kind of getting used to, but instead of going to all the different reports, which were mainly kind of in Google Analytics Universal, now we're just kind of focusing, and then we're kind of, again, sprouting from there. So you can kind of see that we're breaking it down by user, so who the person is as they get on there, and ultimately trying to figure out how much money we're gaining from that person, how much value, I should probably say is a better term, than what we're getting from that person. Also, another one is traffic acquisition. Again, these acquisition reports are the same that you're going to see in acquisition. They're just being presented differently to you, and the user flow of you being able to engage with 4.0 is just going to be kind of different from there. So there's still going to be the graphs. You're still going to be able to see, okay, did they come from search engines? Did they come from referral traffic? Did they come from my Google ads? But now we're just looking at it from a different perspective. So another one is going to be kind of engagement. This one also is one of my new favorite ones because this is the kind of stuff that you had to kind of set up previously on Universal all by yourself. You had to kind of go into events and you had to kind of create custom reports to be able to do this. Now what they're doing is it's essentially these engagement reports. So we can actually see views by page title, which is their user activity over time, which is kind of cool. But what I love and what I want you guys to really kind of check out is the events report. What the events report, and remember, an event is really kind of a single action type of thing that we're tracking. So previously, again, going back to Universal Analytics, this is something that we used to have to track individually. So if you wanted to track someone clicking on again, a button, you would have to set that up. If you wanted to track someone logging into your site, we had to do that. If you wanted to track, someone scrolling, you had to do that. You can see on this chart now that we can actually get those predetermined because again, it's that codeless event tracking. So now Google Analytics 4.0 is able actually to give us all of this information. And if you click on any of those, you can actually get further into that. Again, kind of starting small and then being able to sprout instead of kind of coming up from the back end, which is what Universal was like. So you can kind of see these. So page view, those are going to be normal like Universal. It's just kind of showing you a little bit different. But now we can get right away scrolling, clicking, login, file download, view search results. These are super valuable things that are going to now save you time because you can actually just see them right here. And just as another reminder, remember, if you click into these, you can actually get more data from there. And then we're of course going to get some of the other stuff like conversions. That's going to be one of those main kind of things. I will say 4.0 is really revolved around conversions. So if you're going to set up 4.0, if you're going to upgrade to 4.0, you want to make sure that you spend some time and actually set your conversions. Now, remember, a conversion is any multi-action task that you want someone to do that you either want to track or holds value. Let me give you some examples. So for instance, it might be e-commerce, so someone purchasing something. Of course, someone has to add it to their cart, then check out. It's a multi-action. It's not just clicking on one thing. Maybe it's signing up for a demo. Maybe it's filling out a contact form. Those are things that you can either, again, connect to an e-commerce system and actually track dollar amounts right there. Or there's actually part of Google Analytics, which is really kind of cool, where you can actually just again, assign an arbitrary dollar amount to these things so you can actually track that. Let me give you an example. So for instance, filling out a contact form isn't going to cost any of your users something, but maybe you say like arbitrarily that's worth $25 or $50 if someone's actually reaching out to you. You can put that into there and then Google can help you actually determine your value that your different types of users, that your different types of channels, like for instance, PPC or, again, organic or people coming directly to your site, be able to kind of help you kind of do that first. But again, one of the biggest differences with conversions is that it kind of starts right away. Like we want to set those conversions right away to really get the full value of 4.0. Whereas on Universal, you could just kind of set it up and kind of get going, and then you'd eventually get to conversions. That's really kind of, again, that almost flipping this whole script on its end. And so another really, again, kind of cool report is retention. So if you're familiar with YouTube, YouTube actually goes into a little bit of retention as well. And this is something that Universal doesn't really get into because it goes really deep into that qualitative. Also, cross-device is a huge thing with retention because really what we're trying to figure out here is if we have different users that are coming to our site, that are engaging with our website, with our brand, how long are we actually being able to kind of retain them via the different devices, via the different acquisition, the channels that are kind of coming. So again, you're going to actually see this here is it's broken down via cohort. So if again, if you click into those, you're going to be able to kind of break it down via cohort, so we can see the different kind of collections of people coming to our site that we can be able to kind of track and be able to do. And one of the other things, again, going back to kind of the conversions that I was talking about, is in the bottom right, you actually can start to track something that's called lifetime value. So you can start to actually kind of see that LTV, that long-term or lifetime value of the different people that are kind of coming to your site. Of course, some are going to do something you want and going to have a value there. Some aren't, but you can actually start to see that increase or decrease as kind of time goes by. So this is one of those newer reports that, again, some of the other ones we've already talked about are just kind of reforming what we're used to in Universal. This now is kind of a completely newer report that we're being able to kind of see and be able to kind of play around with. So this one is probably the most common one, is the demographics. So this is the one that we're probably most, again, familiar with, because this is going to tell us, okay, the country report, the geographic report, we're going to be able to then break it down via different ones. But if you're familiar with, Universal, is that you kind of have to go into the demographics report, and there's a ton of one to kind of choose from. Here now, you just go into the demographics one and you start sorting. You can see the red box here. I can right away tell Google Analytics 4.0, okay, so I'm taking all of these different analytics. Maybe you split them into different cohorts or different types of, I want to just look at people that are coming from a search engine. I want to see people that are just coming from my Google ads, things like that. And then we can even parse them out even further. Maybe by country, by city, by language, by age, by gender, by interest level. So some of these things are already on Universal, but this now takes it to a different level because we're using different things to kind of track people on there, which is for you going to be more beneficial to get more of those qualitative stats. And I think, again, you've heard me say this a few times, but that's really the biggest difference here between Universal and 4.0 is we're getting more into conversational qualitative stats. That's the thing to kind of remember, and that's the thing to kind of really kind of focus on, is we're moving towards that qualitative conversational stats and metrics that we get. And so one of the last reports is the tech report. So this is another one that should be somewhat kind of familiar with that. And so, again, we get some of the classic reports along with the browser, the device, your screen resolution. So again, you can get pretty kind of cool with this and really gonna get some granular kind of, again, ideas of where people are coming from. And then it even can start to break down things even further. So if you see in the upper right-hand corner, it can tell you right away, okay, so they came from the web, and then they came from a desktop, from a mobile device, from a tablet. You can start to kind of see these things. If you do have any type of apps, like, phone apps, again, on your phone, this is where you're going to really kind of start to see this and see those different types of reports as well. Is they're going to be kind of in what's called the tech reports, and we'll be able to kind of do that. I will be honest, most of us probably don't have an actual app that's with us, but if you ever do get into that, there, again, we have that. So the idea here is that, we're still validating, strategizing, and discovering from, again, just regular analytics with Universal, but now we're just adding extra layers. So we're now being able to even more see an ROI from our marketing efforts. Again, remember, when we set up Google Analytics 4.0, we're going to be able to start putting in those conversions, putting in those dollar amounts, those conversion values, so that we can really start to clearly see. And then using those artificial intelligence insights, we can start to get Google to recommend things to us or start to ask Google what some of these kind of things mean. And I think that's another important piece too, is remember, when we have artificial intelligence, which again, 4.0 is built around, is the longer you use it and the longer you engage with it, Google is going to be able to learn from that and be able to kind of give you other types of information as they learn, again, your different users, as they learn your different reports, and as they learn what you're even kind of asking for to be able to kind of change that. Now, of course, we can look to kind of strategize this. If that's, being able to see what's working and maybe what's not. Are we getting the value that we need? And kind of last but not least is discovering those different target markets and new opportunities. To be honest here is, if you're looking for a strategy on how to be able to do two things, to migrate from universal to 4.0, or to potentially say, okay, what's the most value I can get? Here are the two recommendations. So I recommend that you do upgrade from universal to 4.0, but there's a key thing that Google allows you to do is to allow you to have both of them. Because I feel that if you just rely on one or the other, again, Universal is really good at kind of saying those, quantitative reports, which most likely you guys have probably been used to if you've been using analytics. And this is a completely new way of kind of looking at analytics when it comes to 4.0. But if we actually combine those together, you can actually create different types of reports and still report internally, externally, whatever you're kind of trying to do. So 4.0 is one of those that you need to kind of work with because, again, it does have AI. But I highly recommend that we kind of have two different types of accounts, and you're able to do that within analytics, and it will clearly state. And if we go back here, if you're kind of familiar with analytics, you'll know that this does look different. We're going to have less reports here. It's just going to look kind of different here. We have the AI button, but really at the end of the day, having both of them is going to, again, provide you the best value by being able to kind of combine those together. So ultimately, those are really the big things to kind of, again, look at and realize this is what's changing from Google Analytics Universal to Google Analytics 4.0. And so really, we have all of the same stuff. You're still going to be using what you're going to still be doing with users and new users and sessions and stuff like that. It's just presented differently. So with that said, I know we have a bunch of, we already have a lot of questions here, and I want to answer as many questions as possible. So I really encourage you to kind of go in the chat. I know this may be confusing at first because like I said, this isn't like before where Google Analytics went from 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0 is like they just kept changing just a little bit of like the interface. This is now changing how Google is actually tracking and displaying and actually thinking about analytics. So this isn't going to be something probably you're going to watch this and go, oh yeah, that, again, we've got it, let's go. It's going to take a little bit of time for you to actually experience with. Almost, this is probably going to be like the first time you ever engaged with Google Analytics previously. So I encourage you guys to put some questions in here, and I'd love to be able to answer them for that. So I've got one from Scott that said, I'm a website newbie running a small business. How do you recommend we add Google Analytics to our site? So the first question would be, Scott, is if you already have Google Analytics installed. If you do, then it's simply going into your admin section, and there's going to be a button that says upgrade to G4, so Google Analytics 4.0, and you're going to be able to go through the process there. If you don't have Google Analytics installed already, what you're going to want to be able to do is you're going to want to just install this as it is. This is now the new default Google Analytics. So pretty much from here on out, if you don't have analytics, it's going to essentially kind of default to Google Analytics 4.0. That's why it's important when you're either creating or upgrading to Google Analytics 4.0 that you tell Google that you want both versions. And there will clearly be pretty much a box that you click that allows you to tell Google that choice. So you're going to want to make sure that you do have both. And then Katie says, can 4.0 be implemented through Tag Manager? Yes, you can connect these. So if you are using Google Tag Manager, and honestly, what we're starting to see too, and that's a great question, Katie, is to be able to start to implement Google Analytics 4.0 via Tag Manager, but then also integrate them kind of together and be able to kind of get the benefits of Tag Manager. For those of you guys aren't familiar with Google Tag Manager, I encourage you to kind of check it out. It really helps implementing different types of code and different type of tracking mechanisms or different conversions a little bit easier than kind of just going through actual Google Analytics as it is. I have another question here that says, Ben, what does cross-device tracking mean, and how do we use it? And so really one of the things to kind of look at, really all, again, just as a reiteration of it, is that cross-device is when people, nowadays, is people have a laptop and they sometimes have a computer, maybe they have two laptops, a phone, a tablet, they have all these kind of things. It's a way that we can try to kind of track them amongst all of their devices. And again, it goes back to that Google Analytics 4.0 end-to-end journey. So utilizing how do we track someone once they first engage onto our site, no matter what device it is, back to wherever you're tracking or your date range is to the last time that they engaged with your site as well. That's really what we're kind of looking at, and that's what cross-device is going to be able to do. I have another question that came in here, and that says, Ben, can we actually look at Analytics 4.0 on an app? So just clarifying there, just making sure that if you're asking if we're able to track, or excuse me, if we're able to view Google Analytics 4.0 or Google Analytics on an app, yes. Google Analytics both has an Android and an Apple, again, app. I do recommend, though, doing this all on a desktop, especially when we get into the nitty gritty, and especially when we're using artificial intelligence. There's so much information now. It gets really tricky to be able to try to, you as a marketer or you as responsible for that, being able to, again, glean and get all of that information on your tablet or on your phone gets really tricky. So I do recommend people, make sure you spend some time on a desktop and go through the different versions there. Perfect. Does anybody have any other questions? So really, like, what I would look at as 4.0 is really a supplemental, analytics kind of piece. And, as we're going through this transition, like I said, there may be a time where 3.0 or /universal isn't around anymore. But right now we can have both. So I want to look at it, especially if you've been doing Google Analytics for a while, I want to look at this as a supplemental thing. See what more information you can get. See what other conversations that Analytics 4.0 can really kind of do for you and your business, again, within the realms of tracking your users. So that's ultimately what 4.0 is. And if you kind of go in it with that kind of perspective, especially as you start to learn 4.0, I feel like it will really, again, help you and make it easier. Oh, we just had a question pop in here from Jen. It says, how do you see the keywords now? The ones they type in to find your website. So here is one of the, again, things, Jen, is that, yeah, we still don't get some of that data like we used to years back. And the only way to kind of get keyword data is going to be from Google, that is going to be from, Google Search Console. So you are correct, is that it is still in Google Search Console, and you can actually integrate those together along with, again, Tag Manager and, again, Google Ads. So you can bring some of your other kind of, platforms out there kind of together, but they are predominantly still going to be within Google Search Console. The beauty of it is, and again, for those of you guys that aren't familiar, Google Search Console is a fantastic platform. It's another Google platform that allows you to kind of connect your website and communicate and see different types of data, errors, or warnings from Google. But one of the things that you can get from there is some search query data, or again, some search keyword data that you again, normally potentially wouldn't have. So you can actually start to see some keywords that you're ranking for that are driving traffic to your site. You can actually connect those to Google Search Console and Analytics, and you can actually import some of that data. But there really isn't a special keyword report for that. So Catherine just said, so it's Google Search Console. So the platform, just simply Google Search Console, and you'll be able to kind of set up that platform. It's really kind of one time. Honestly, if you are managing your website, absolutely you should be looking at Google Search Console, because like I said, not only can you get some of the keywords there, but there's a really kind of cool feature that they've released about, I think it's about a year and a half now, where they'll actually send you, say, hey, we noticed this on your site and we would recommend you change this. Or, hey, we found this error on your site, which could have some ramifications to your, again, your website ranking and everything like that. So yeah, so again, it is Google Search Console is what you're looking for. Perfect. Do we have any other questions? So if you guys are thinking about asking a question and looking at this, one thing I want you to do is keep my information in, again, here, you can kind of see it here. Again, if you guys have questions as you start to try to upgrade, start to set up 4.0, start to kind of get in, if you have questions, please feel free to reach out. That's what we're kind of here for. I also would like to kind of offer, we do free, no obligation consultations. It's just another way that we give back. So if you need a little bit of help with something and you need a little bit further, then obviously right now we kind of do classroom style, and you need to ask a little bit, hey, was this set up correctly? What does this mean? I encourage you to take advantage of that. If this isn't us selling our services, if you want to talk about our services and what we Skol Marketing can do for you, that's great. This is just something separate that we do to kind of give back. And so if you're interested or curious about having a consultation with us, if it's related to analytics, if it's really related to anything with digital marketing, you can do that and get a little bit more of our time to actually be able to answer some of your questions and actually kind of put you on the right path or help you even correct some things. And like I said, there's no charge at all with that. That's just kind of what we do to give back. So if you want one of those, feel free to kind of reach out. You can call, text, or email us. But with that said, I also want to encourage you to check out our other workshops. So like I said, I mentioned Google Analytics, our previous ones. We have 2 other Google Analytic workshops. I really encourage you, again, if you're going to go down 4.0's path, to refresh yourself maybe with some of those. Again, understanding just the basics and kind of using 4.0 as a building block. So let's make sure we understand the basics of Google Analytics. Then we build a little bit higher. Then we build a little bit higher. That most likely is going to be the most efficient and best way that you can build your knowledge up with Google Analytics. And you can see not only our upcoming workshops at skolmarketing.com/workshops, you can also find our previously recorded workshops on our YouTube completely free of charge as well. So with that said, I hope that you guys learned something new today. I hope that you were introduced to Analytics 4.0, and I really hope that you're able to start to kind of implement that as a supplemental metrics and analytics kind of piece to it. Again, if you guys have any questions, please reach out, but I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and Skol.
Oh, I've got to unmute me. Anyway, thanks, Ben. This has been great. I have posted a poll. Please take a couple of minutes before you leave to fill out the poll. It's really helpful. We use it in planning our future webinars, which is something we're going through in the process of right now with our learning committee. And we'll look forward to seeing you at future webinars or workshops. I have posted at the very beginning of the chat a link if you want to request a SCORE mentor. I also have posted a link there if you want to see what we have coming up in other workshops, or if you want to do as Ben suggested, you can go to that link and go back to past workshops that SCORE Twin Cities has put on and download the slides, as well as for many of them, you can access a recording of the webinar. As far as the recording of this webinar, you'll be receiving it within the next couple of days, an email with a link to that. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I noticed that. Sorry about that. Anyway, so okay. Okay, well, I'm going to close the webinar now. I hope all of you who wanted to complete the survey have, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at a future SCORE webinar or workshop. Thanks a lot. Have a good day and keep moving forward.